My name is Tessa, I'm 29, and the last person I ever expected to see at my front door was the man who abandoned my mother and me when I was 8. But last week, he showed up out of nowhere, saying he needed my help in court. And the reason he gave, well, it nearly stopped my heartbeat. If you're watching this, tell me where you're tuning in from and subscribe for more family drama and emotional courage stories. I always thought the past stayed where you left it, quiet, dusty, and far behind you. But on that cold Tuesday morning, the past found my front door and knocked loud enough to shake something inside me. I remember the exact moment it happened. I was standing in my kitchen holding a mug of lukewarm coffee, trying to convince myself to reheat it, when I heard 3 slow knocks. The kind that weren't rushed but weren't friendly either. For a second, I thought it was a delivery driver, or maybe my neighbor needing help with one of her endless home repairs. But when I opened the door, the world seemed to tilt just slightly to the left. Standing on my porch with his shoulders slumped and a hesitant half-smile, was the man I used to stare at through an apartment window, wondering why he never came back. "Hey Tessa." That voice. I hadn't heard it in 21 years, but it crawled right back into my memory like it never left. My father, Evan. The man who walked out when I was 8 and never sent so much as a birthday card. The man who made promises he never kept. The man I had learned to live without. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The shock on my face said everything. And he seemed to take it as permission to keep talking. "You look like your mother," he said softly, like that was supposed to make this less painful. "Why are you here?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. I pulled the door just enough to remind him he wasn't welcome past the frame. He swallowed, looking down at his hands before lifting his eyes back to mine. "Can I come in? I really need to talk to you." I should have said no. Any reasonable person would tell you that. But curiosity, mixed with anger, hurt, and something like unfinished business, pushed me to step aside. I let him in with that same uneasy feeling you get when you allow a stranger into your home. And in many ways he was exactly that. He looked around my small living room, scanning the photos on my wall. My college graduation, my mother at Thanksgiving, my friends on a road trip. I noticed him stopping at the only picture of me as a child, missing one front tooth and holding a stuffed rabbit to my chest. His eyes softened. I looked away. "I didn't know where else to go," he finally said, pulling the words out like they weighed something heavy. "I know I don't deserve your time. I know that. But I need your help." There it was. The reason he came. Because of course he didn't show up out of love or regret. He needed something. They always do. "What kind of help?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. He hesitated before saying it. I need you to testify for me." It felt like the air in the room shifted. I didn't speak. I waited. "It's about my daughter." "My daughter." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. "My daughter." He said it like it was supposed to make sense to me. "She's 7, he said. "And I'm fighting for custody. It's complicated. Her mother's trying to make me look like I don't care about my kids. Like I've never been there. I need you to explain to the court that I was a good dad. That I was around. That we had a relationship." The silence that followed was so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest. "You want me to lie?" I finally said. He flinched. "No. Not lie. Just tell them we stayed in touch. That I supported you. That." "None of that happened, Evan." Calling him by his first name felt more natural than calling him Dad. Because he wasn't one. Not really. He opened his mouth like he had something to defend himself with, but no words came out. He just looked tired, worn out, like life had taken a toll on him. He didn't look like the strong, bigger-than-life father I used to imagine. He looked human. Maybe too human. And for a moment I wondered if he expected me to feel sorry for him. He shifted on the couch. "I know I messed up. I know I wasn't there for you. But this little girl, she needs me. And her mother's trying to take her away. I can't lose her." I leaned against the edge of the doorway, crossing my arms. "So now you want to play parent?" He rubbed his face, clearly frustrated. "You don't understand." I laughed once, short, not amused. "How could I? You never gave me the chance." The room felt warmer suddenly, like all the years of anger I'd tucked neatly away were looking for a way out. I walked to the window, needing space, needing air. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked. Life continued normally, unaware that mine had been shaken loose. He cleared his throat. "Tessa, please just listen." Against better judgment, I did. Not because I wanted to help him, but because I needed answers I never got as a child. He started explaining how he'd met a woman years ago, how things were good at first, how they had a daughter named Emily, and how everything fell apart when arguments over schedules, jobs, responsibility, and finances turned the house into a constant battlefield. I listened, trying not to filter everything he said through the lens of our own past, his broken promises, his disappearing acts. At one point he said something that stuck with me. "She tells the court I disappear when things get hard, that I avoid responsibility, that I'm unreliable." I stared at him. "And you can't figure out why she'd say that?" He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth sat between us like something neither of us wanted to touch. Then something unexpected happened. His voice cracked. "I just want one chance to do better." I wasn't ready for the sting of sympathy I felt. It confused me, annoyed me. I didn't know whether to believe him or protect myself. A gust of wind rattled the window, and for a second, everything felt too quiet. "Why did you leave us?" I asked softly. He looked at me, then really looked. His shoulders slumped the way people's do when they're holding guilt they've carried too long. I was young, stupid, overwhelmed. I thought leaving would fix things. I thought your mom and you would be better without me messing everything up. And then more time passed. And more. And before I knew it, it felt too late. "That's your excuse?" "It's the truth." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to shout. Another part wanted to walk away. And a small part wanted to sit down and cry for the child version of myself who never got these answers. Instead I asked, "Why now?" He took a breath. "Because you're the only one who can help me. You're the only child I've ever failed this badly. And if I lose this case, I'll lose her. And I can't live with that." His words sat with me. Heavy. Complicated. Unfair. I needed air. I grabbed my coat and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit me instantly, waking me up. My father followed but kept his distance, sensing I needed space. Across the street, Mrs. Franklin was sweeping her front steps. She waved at me. Life again, going on as though my world wasn't being rearranged piece by painful piece. "I don't know what you expect from me," I said quietly. "I expect nothing," he replied. "I'm just asking." A long moment passed. My breath fogged in the air. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets. "I need time," I said finally. "A lot of it." He nodded. "Take all you need. I'm staying at the old Rosemont Motel off Highway 6. If you want to talk, I'll be there." He gave me a small, hopeful smile, the kind I didn't know how to respond to, and walked away. I watched him until he turned the corner, until his figure disappeared, until the morning felt quiet again. But inside, nothing was quiet. Not anymore. Because the day he walked back into my life, everything I thought I had buried came back up to breathe. When my father turned the corner and vanished from sight, the quiet outside didn't comfort me the way it usually did. The neighborhood felt strangely out of focus, as if everything around me knew something had shifted inside me. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of everything that moment stirred up. I walked slowly back into the living room, noticing his imprint on the couch cushion, the faint scent of his cologne, something sharp and unfamiliar. It amazed me how a few minutes with him could reopen wounds I spent years convincing myself were healed, or at least buried deep enough to forget about. But the truth was unavoidable now. The past I kept tucked away had been pushed into the light, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I sat down, pulled my knees up, and rested my chin on them. The house felt too quiet, too still. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock, and even those small sounds felt loud against my racing thoughts. His words echoed in my mind. I was young, overwhelmed. I thought leaving would make things easier. It was strange how someone could say a few sentences and rearrange 20 years' worth of emotions. Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part of me pushed back, reminding me he hadn't shown concern when I cried myself to sleep as a child. He didn't know the nights I sat on my bedroom floor, staring at the front door, hoping maybe he'd appear as some kind of surprise. He didn't know I grew out of those hopes too early. That version of me, the girl who waited, came back in pieces now. Not in anger but in sadness. A gentle, quiet sadness I never talked about. I got up and walked to the hallway, stopping at the small closet where I kept a plastic bin of childhood things. I hadn't opened it in years. Maybe that was why I reached for it now. The latch clicked open and I pulled the lid back. Inside were things I hadn't let myself look at too closely. A faded pink backpack from 3rd grade. A small stack of drawings I made for my mother. A birthday card from my 9th birthday, the year after he left, with her handwriting trying too hard to fill the space of 2 parents. But beneath everything was something I almost forgot existed. A photo of me sitting on my father's shoulders at a county fair. I must have been 5. I was laughing, my hands gripping his hair to stay balanced. He looked young, carefree, like the version of him that could have been someone worth missing. I touched the edges of the picture, feeling something twist in my stomach. Not longing. More like a soft reminder that he wasn't always the man who walked away. Sometimes long ago he was someone I adored. The memory that followed surprised me. The way he used to lift me onto the kitchen counter to help him mix pancake batter on Saturday mornings. The flour he got everywhere. The songs he hummed without knowing the lyrics. How he'd spin me around the living room until I begged him to stop, only to ask for one more turn. Those memories were tiny glimmers in a place that had gone dark for so long. Still holding the photo, I sat cross-legged on the carpet and let my mind drift. I remembered the night he left. Not the whole thing but pieces of it. The loud argument between him and my mother, muffled through the bedroom door. The way she tried to hide her tears when she tucked me in. The suitcase by the front door in the morning. The way he kissed my forehead but wouldn't look me in the eye. That was the part that always hurt the most, how he left without giving me a real goodbye. I placed the photo back in the bin, closed the lid gently and stood up. The weight of everything I felt made me want to talk to someone. And the only person I could talk to about any of this was my mother. She lived 20 minutes away, in a small house she'd worked years to afford. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and drove. The road was familiar, lined with tall maple trees and quiet houses. My mind wandered as I drove, remembering small pieces of childhood. Some warm, some painful, all tangled together now that he had reappeared. When I pulled into her driveway, I saw her sitting on the porch, wrapped in a cardigan, sipping tea. She had that calm presence that could soften any storm inside me. She smiled when she saw me, but her expression shifted when she noticed the tension in my face. "Sweetheart," she said. "What's wrong?" I sat beside her, feeling the porch steps creak under my weight. "Mom, he came to see me." She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. Her fingers tightened around her cup, but her voice remained steady. "When?" "This morning." She exhaled slowly. "Did he say why?" I nodded. "He needs help. Something about a custody case for a daughter of his." Her eyebrows lifted, not in judgment, just in quiet realization. "So he wants you to speak on his behalf?" "Yes." A moment passed. A passing car rolled down the street. A dog barked 2 houses away. It all made the air feel strangely ordinary despite the heaviness between us. My mother reached for my hand. "And how do you feel?" The question sank into me. I didn't know how to answer at first. "Confused," I said finally. "Angry. Sad. A little guilty. I don't know why I feel guilty, but I do. That's natural. He's your father, even if he wasn't present." I looked at her, needing more than that. "Do you hate him?" She shook her head softly. "No. I used to. But hate takes too much out of a person. I let it go so I could breathe again. You don't have to hate him either. But you don't have to protect him." I nodded, appreciating her balance. She had always been the kind of woman who found strength in gentleness. "Do you think he's changed?" I asked. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "People can change, but not always in the way we hope. You'll have to decide for yourself what feels right." Her honesty grounded me the way it always had. We stayed outside a while longer, talking about little things, her garden, her neighbor's new dog, the weather turning colder. Even those simple topics felt comforting after the emotional storm in my chest. Before I left, she gave me a hug that lingered a little longer than usual. I held on to it, grateful for how she held my past and present without ever making me feel broken. Driving home, I felt a mix of heaviness and clarity. I still didn't know what I would do about my father's request, but I knew I needed to understand more about the years he'd been absent. Not to justify him, not to excuse him, but to figure out where I stood. When I got home, I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat at the table with my notebook, the one I used whenever my mind felt too full. I wrote down everything I could remember from childhood. Not just the painful moments but the good ones too. The parts one never allowed myself to think about because they made the loss more real. I wrote about the day he taught me how to ride a bike. The time he let me pick a movie even though he hated animated films. The birthday when he showed up with balloons tied to the roof of his old car, laughing as they nearly flew away. Then the notebook shifted. I wrote about the confusion I felt when he stopped showing up. The excuses my mother made to soften the blow. The way neighbors whispered sometimes, as if they knew something I didn't. I wrote until my hand ached. When I finally set the pen down, I felt lighter. Not healed. Not resolved. But less tangled inside. The notebook stayed open on the table as evening settled in. The sky outside turned shades of pink and gold. I stared at the words I'd written and realized something important. I had never told anyone most of these memories. Not even my closest friends. I had locked them away so tightly that opening them felt like touching something sharp and delicate at the same time. I closed the notebook gently, as if protecting the child version of myself tucked inside its pages. As night came, I made myself a simple dinner. Nothing fancy, just enough to settle my stomach. While I ate, my thoughts drifted back to his face when he asked for help. The mix of fear and regret. The way he didn't pretend to be perfect but didn't fully take responsibility either. That part bothered me. Accountability mattered, especially when it came to parenting. After dinner, I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. The air was crisp. The sky was clear enough to see a few stars. Walking always helped me think without forcing the thoughts. As I passed the small park near my house, I noticed a father pushing his little girl on a swing. Her laughter cut through the quiet evening. It was a light sound full of trust. He pushed her gently, smiling every time she said, "Higher." That single moment touched something inside me. Not envy. Not bitterness. Just awareness. Awareness of what I missed. Awareness of what I longed for as a child and learned to live without. I stood for a moment, watching the scene quietly from a distance. Then I continued walking, thinking about how different my life might have been if my father had stayed. And how different I might have been too. When I finally returned home, the house felt calmer. Not peaceful but steadier. I changed into comfortable clothes, sat on the edge of my bed, and looked around the room. My life was simple, quiet, stable, built piece by piece without him. And yet, his return had stirred everything. I turned off the light, pulled the blanket over myself and lay still. The past wasn't just knocking anymore. It had stepped inside. But for the first time I wasn't afraid to face it. I knew I wasn't done sorting through these emotions. I knew there were still answers I needed, ones only he could give. But tonight I let myself rest. Because acknowledging the past, even in small pieces, was the first step toward understanding what came next. I stayed sitting in my car for a long moment after leaving the quiet street where Evan lived, my hand still resting on the steering wheel, my breath steadying after everything he had told me. Or rather, everything he claimed to have told me. That uneasy feeling from earlier, something soft but persistent, kept tugging at the back of my mind. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. It was that instinct you get when you know a piece of someone's story is missing. I wasn't planning to see him again so soon, but the next day he texted. A simple message. "Can we meet again? Just talk. Please." I reread the message 3 times before replying. I didn't say yes right away. I needed a moment to think, to breathe, to remind myself who I was talking to. But in the end, curiosity and something heavier pulled me toward agreeing. We settled on a small diner off the highway, one of those places that had probably looked the same since the 70s. Light blue booths, a buzzing neon open sign, silver napkin holders, and a waitress who seemed like she'd seen every family secret in town. I arrived first. I sat near the window watching cars pass by in the cold afternoon light. My hand stayed wrapped around a warm cup of coffee even after it cooled. When the bell above the door finally jingled, I looked up and saw Evan walking in. He looked worse than the day before. His eyes were tired. His jacket seemed thrown on. His shoulders drooped like he was carrying a weight he couldn't set down. But what caught me was how he scanned the diner first, as if expecting someone to step out and question his every move. He walked over with a stiff attempt at a smile. "Thanks for coming, Tessa," he said quietly. I nodded, but my guard was already up. "You said you needed to talk again?" He sat across from me, fingers tapping against the table, then stopping, then tapping again. It was nervous energy. Not the kind that comes from fear of judgment, but the kind that comes from concealing something. "I know I didn't give you the full picture yesterday," he finally said. "I figured," I replied, calm but steady. His eyes flickered toward the window, then to the salt shaker, then to his coffee cup when the waitress dropped it off. He lifted it, put it down without drinking, then cleared his throat. "It's just been hard," he said. "I'm dealing with a lot. More than I said." "What exactly are you dealing with, Evan?" I asked softly, trying not to sound confrontational. "Because I can tell there's more." He sighed and rubbed his forehead with both hands. "I'm fighting for custody, yes, but it's not just custody. It's everything. My job, my apartment, my stability. I'm on the edge, Tess. Really on the edge." I leaned back slightly. "That's not what you said yesterday." He shook his head. "I didn't want to bury you in my problems. I didn't want you to think I'm some kind of mess." I didn't respond right away. Something about the way he said that didn't sit right. Felt too scripted, too practiced, like he'd used that line before. "What do you mean by on the edge?" I asked. This time he hesitated a second too long. "I might lose everything," he repeated, his voice cracking a little. "Work's been unstable. My landlord's been after me. And the court, well, things aren't exactly going my way." When he looked up, his eyes were already glassy. I had expected some emotional guilt or desperation, but what struck me was the phrasing. "Things aren't going my way." That didn't sound like someone fighting to protect a child. It sounded like someone fighting for themselves. I didn't say that out loud. Instead I asked, "What does any of that have to do with me?" "You're my daughter," he said automatically. A small knot tightened in my stomach. "Biologically," I corrected. He winced. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice as if someone might overhear. "I need character witnesses. People who can say I've been steady, consistent, involved. I need someone who can say I'm dependable." "And you thought of me?" I asked, eyebrows raising. "You're the only one who won't be dismissed by the court," he whispered. "Your blood." There it was. The truth he danced around yesterday. Not emotional. Not fatherly. Purely strategic. Before I could respond, someone approached our table. A woman with short brown hair, wearing a thick winter coat and holding a to-go cup. She paused, her eyes fixed sharply on Evan. "Oh," she muttered under her breath. "Of course you're here." Evan stiffened. The woman didn't smile. She didn't greet him. She just looked tired. Like someone who had gone through this routine more times than she wanted to admit. She nodded politely toward me. "Sorry for interrupting. I just needed my order." But as she walked away with her drink, I could feel the tension she left behind. Evan's jaw tightened, and he stared down at the table. "Who was that?" I asked. He hesitated. "My ex. The mother of your child?" Another hesitation. "Yes." But it didn't feel like a full yes. He looked annoyed, almost embarrassed. "She always shows up at the worst times," he muttered. I watched her through the window as she walked to her car. She didn't look angry. She didn't look frazzled. She looked done. Finished with something that had exhausted her for years. "Did she know you were meeting me?" I asked. "No," he snapped. Too quickly. I folded my hands on the table. "What happened between you two, Evan? And please don't give me the short version." He ran a hand over his face. "It's complicated." I didn't break eye contact. "Make it simple." He swallowed hard. "She's painting me out to be irresponsible." "And are you?" I asked. He glared slightly. "No. She's just trying to win." But the edge in his voice wasn't confidence. It was defensiveness. And defensiveness usually hides something. The waitress came by, refilling his cup. When she left again, the diner fell quiet except for the soft hum of conversation around us. I waited, giving him space to speak. But he didn't continue. so I changed the direction. Is it true you've been steady? With work? With housing? With being present? He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked away. Just then the diner door jingled again, and I glanced up out of habit. The same woman, his ex, stepped back inside, walking straight to the counter because they had forgotten something in her bag. She didn't even look our way, but I could see her reflection in the metal napkin dispenser on our table. I could also see how Evan flinched when she came in again. That flinch told me more than all his words combined. After she finally left, I leaned forward. Evan, what's the real reason you need me? He froze. Then the wall he'd been patching up began to crumble. He rubbed his hands together, stared at them, and spoke so quietly I had to lean in. I told the court I've always been there, he said. I told them I never left anyone behind. I told them I'm a consistent presence, a steady father, a responsible adult. And I asked, and they want proof, he whispered. I let his words settle for a moment. You lied, I said softly. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence was loud enough. You told them you never abandoned anyone, I continued, including me. He finally looked up. His eyes weren't remorseful. They weren't even pleading. They were calculating. I thought it might help my case, he admitted. My breath left my chest in one slow, stunned exhale. He hadn't just left me behind. He hadn't just shown up years later. He had rewritten the past to make himself look better, and was now hoping I'd stand beside him to confirm a version of history that had never existed. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the warmth steady me. And what about the child? I asked quietly. He blinked. What about them? Would you being awarded custody actually be in their best interest? He leaned back. Of course. I'm their father. That's not a real answer. He didn't like that. He straightened, jaw tight. She can't keep them from me, he said. I deserve a chance. But do they deserve a stable home? I asked. The pause that followed cut straight through me. And in that pause I realized something important. If I helped him, I wouldn't just be lying for him. I might be helping hurt a child who had nothing to do with any of this. At that moment the pieces fell into place. The nervous habits, the shifting stories, the flinch when his ex walked in, the gaps in his explanations. He wasn't looking for family. He wasn't looking for reconciliation. He was looking for cover. For a shield. For a story that could save him. And he wanted me to hold that story up in court. My voice was steady when I finally spoke. Evan, I need the whole truth. Every part of it. Not the edited version. He looked up sharply. Because if I find out you're hiding anything else, I continued. I'm not just walking away. I'm telling the court exactly who you are. The fear in his eyes wasn't the fear of losing a daughter. It was the fear of losing a case. And for the first time since he showed up on my doorstep, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted yet. Helping him blindly could destroy someone's life. But exposing the truth, his real truth, might finally free mine. The courthouse smelled of polished wood, stale coffee, and the faint tang of anxiety. I parked a little too far from the entrance, my hands gripping the steering wheel longer than necessary, as if delaying stepping into that building could somehow delay the storm waiting inside. My stomach was a tangle of nerves, fear, anger, guilt, and a quiet determination that I clung to desperately. I pulled my coat tighter around me and stepped onto the stone steps, the winter chill biting my cheeks. Each footfall echoed in my ears like a drumbeat announcing what I already knew. This day would change everything. Inside, the lobby was quiet. A few people shuffled papers, whispered to each other, or checked their phones. I spotted Evan immediately, sitting on a bench near the entrance. He looked impossibly calm, leaning back with his arms crossed. But his leg tapped in a rapid, jittery rhythm. A small giveaway to the tension he was hiding behind that composed facade. I walked past him slowly, every step heavy. He didn't meet my eyes. I wanted to think it was confidence, but I could see the subtle tremor in his jaw, the faint lines of worry around his eyes. He was relying on me to save him, and that made my stomach churn even more. When we reached the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors closed behind us with a thud that resonated deep in my chest. The room smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Rows of benches stretched before me, and the judge's bench loomed at the front like a silent sentinel. I took a seat in the witness preparation area and tried to steady my breathing. My hands were clammy, my thoughts scattered, but I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times. Each time it felt different. The truth was heavier than anything I'd imagined. Finally, it was my turn. The bailiff called my name and I rose, moving toward the witness stand. Every step felt like walking through a fog of memory. The clicks of my shoes against the hard floor sounded impossibly loud. Evan's eyes met mine for a fleeting second. There was hope there, a subtle plea that made my chest tighten. I took the oath, placing my hand on the Bible. The words felt hollow, distant, like an echo of something I used to believe in as a child. But this was no game. This was real, and my words would carry weight. The attorney approached, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm, deliberate voice. She introduced herself, then asked the first question. Please tell the court your full name and your relationship to the defendant. Tessa James, I said, my voice steady despite the tightness in my throat. I'm his daughter. A few heads in the courtroom turned, curious murmurs fluttering like distant wings. Evan's face remained impassive, but I could see the tension ripple across his shoulders. The next question hit me harder than I expected. Can you describe your relationship with your father growing up? I swallowed, the memory of those empty nights pressing down. I closed my eyes for a split second, recalling the moments that had defined my childhood. The absence of a father when I most needed him. The nights staring at the front door, wondering if he'd come back. The birthdays he missed, the school plays where I performed alone, the quiet ache of longing I carried in my chest. I didn't really have a relationship with him, I said carefully. He left when I was 8. And for many years I didn't hear from him at all. There were long stretches where I felt abandoned, like he decided I wasn't worth the effort. The courtroom fell silent. Evan's jaw tightened, and his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the chair. I met his eyes briefly, seeing the flicker of something I hadn't expected: vulnerability. He didn't look angry. He didn't argue. He just waited. Did he ever try to reach out during your childhood? The attorney pressed. Occasionally, I said, my voice gaining strength. But the attempts were inconsistent. He would show up sometimes, then disappear again. Every time I started to hope, he left again. And that hurt more than I can describe. I noticed the murmur from a few spectators and took a breath, forcing myself to continue. This wasn't about sympathy. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Were there promises he made to you that were broken? The attorney asked. Yes, I said firmly. Promises to be there, to help, to support me emotionally. I learned early that his words didn't mean anything unless he acted on them. And he rarely did. Evan's face tightened. I could see the mask of confidence slipping slowly. He shifted in his seat, fidgeting slightly, and I knew I was hitting the part of his story he couldn't defend. The next question was the hardest. Can you describe him as a parent? I paused. This was the moment I'd feared. I could lie. I could say he'd been loving, devoted, present. I could smooth over the years of pain and make him look better in front of the judge. But I couldn't. Not for him. Not for a child I had never met. I inhaled, steadying myself. He wasn't a parent to me, I said slowly. He wasn't there when I needed him. He left my mother and me to handle everything on our own. He broke promises. He hurt us emotionally. And for years I carried that with me. The courtroom went still. Even the rustle of papers seemed loud. I glanced at Evan. He looked frozen, speechless, like he hadn't expected this. His hands shook slightly as they rested on his knees. I'm not saying he didn't care at times, I continued, my voice growing steadier. But caring isn't just words. It's actions. And his actions left scars that don't just disappear. The judge's eyes softened slightly, but there was a weight to them that made me realize this testimony was real, and it mattered. Have these experiences affected how you view him now? The attorney asked gently. Yes, I said honestly. I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I also understand that people are flawed. I can't pretend the past didn't happen. And I can't help him rewrite it to suit his needs, especially if it could harm someone else. Evan opened his mouth, probably to argue, but the judge gave him a sharp glance. He closed it again, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him in years. The attorney nodded, satisfied. Thank you, Tessa. One more question. If asked, could you support him as a parent today? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the room pressing down on me. I thought of the child, the innocent one caught in the middle of his manipulation. I thought of the life I had built without him, the boundaries I had fought so hard to maintain. No, I said firmly. I cannot. Not because I want to hurt him, but because I can't support something that isn't real. I can't put a child at risk by pretending my father was a good parent when he wasn't. The courtroom was silent. Evan's lips parted slightly, his eyes wide. He hadn't expected that. I saw a flicker of disbelief, maybe even shock, flash across his face. The judge leaned back slightly, taking a moment to process everything. I felt relief wash over me, but it was mixed with sorrow. This wasn't easy. This wasn't just a legal moment. This was the first time I had spoken the full truth about my childhood aloud, and it carried more weight than I had realized. Evan didn't speak. He simply sat, shoulders slumped, as his carefully constructed image crumbled in front of everyone. The people who had probably been inclined to see him as a perfect father now had a different picture. And I could see in that moment how fragile his version of reality really was. As I stepped down from the stand, I felt both exhaustion and a strange lightness. I had spoken the truth. I had faced the pain that he had caused, and I had not allowed him to manipulate it for his benefit. Outside the courtroom, the air felt colder, sharper, but also clearer. I walked past the hallways, past the offices and waiting areas, and felt the past settle behind me. Not forgotten, not erased, but acknowledged. And that acknowledgement carried power. For the first time in decades, I realized that truth wasn't just about exposing someone else. It was about reclaiming myself. It was about deciding what I would allow to shape my life, and what I wouldn't. Evan's absence had defined me for years, but this courtroom moment, the confrontation, the honesty, the raw, unflinching truth was reclaiming me. Not by forgiveness, not by reconciliation, but by clarity. And as I left the courthouse, the winter sun cutting across the steps, I understood something profound. The past could return, but it didn't have to control me. I could face it, I could speak it, and I could step into a life where truth, not lies, guided the way forward. The courthouse doors closed behind me, and for a moment I just stood there, letting the echo of my own footsteps carry away the weight that had pressed on me for so long. Outside, the winter air was crisp, almost painfully cold, and yet it felt like a relief against the suffocating tension that had wrapped the courtroom like a thick fog. I took a deep breath, feeling it travel all the way down into my chest, and realized I hadn't done that, truly breathed, in years. I didn't rush to the car. I didn't answer the text messages waiting on my phone. I just walked, one step at a time, past the courthouse steps and the gathering of people who were leaving behind their own dramas, oblivious to mine. And with each step, I felt a strange lightness, the heaviness of expectation, obligation, and silence slowly loosening its grip. I found a quiet bench near a small fountain across the street and sat down, letting my coat wrap around me. My hands rested in my lap, still trembling slightly from adrenaline and relief. For the first time since I could remember, I felt entirely alone, but in a way that wasn't painful. It was freeing. Alone yet unburdened by lies, by manipulation, by the ghosts of my father's choices. I thought about Evan, about how he had looked in the courtroom, his confidence shattered, his carefully constructed story exposed, and the way his eyes had widened at my honesty. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt clarity. Seeing him falter didn't make the past right, but it did make the truth undeniable, and that, I realized, was the only thing that mattered. A light breeze rustled through the bare branches of the trees around me. I pulled my coat tighter and let my mind wander to all the little moments that had led me here. The long nights waiting for a father who never came, the letters I wrote and never sent, the hollow ache of birthday candles blown out alone, the whispered conversations with my mother about how some people just weren't meant to stay. Every memory was still there, sharp and real, but it no longer controlled me. I closed my eyes for a moment and let myself remember the first time I had ever confronted him as an adult. The anger that had surged, the questions that burned on my tongue, the hope that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. I remembered the diner, the nervous fidgeting, the half-truths, the lies he had tried to hide beneath charm and smiles. And I remembered the moment I realized helping him wasn't an act of love, It was a risk to an innocent child. That realization had been like a door swinging open inside me. It forced me to see him as he was, not as I had imagined him in the quiet loneliness of my childhood. And standing in the courtroom speaking those words aloud, I felt a weight lift, a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying. I glanced down at my hands. They were steady now. The tremor had passed. I had faced the past, spoken the truth, and survived it. And in surviving it, I had reclaimed something I hadn't known I'd lost. My voice. My choice. My freedom. A small smile tugged at my lips. Not a triumphant smile, not one of gloating. Just a soft acknowledgement that I had endured, and that I was stronger for it. I stood and began walking again, this time with purpose. I didn't go straight home. I wandered through the quiet streets, past the little cafes, the closed shops, the people bustling about in their ordinary lives. And I realized that my ordinary life, my life without him dictating my emotions or rewriting history, was mine to shape. At one point I passed a park where children were playing in the snow, their laughter ringing clear and light. I paused, watching them, and felt a pang of sorrow for the child Evan might have hurt if I had been swayed into supporting him. But that pang quickly shifted to resolve. I could not change the past, nor could I rewrite his mistakes, but I could ensure that truth and safety remained a priority for the innocent lives involved. A woman walking her dog passed by, giving me a polite nod. I nodded back and realized how ordinary life could be comforting. No drama, no manipulation, just simple human connection, and the steady rhythm of everyday existence. That, I realized, was where real freedom lived. I remembered my mother's words from years ago. You can't make someone love or respect you, but you can choose how much space they occupy in your life. I had carried that advice silently for decades, but today it finally made sense in a visceral, undeniable way. Evan's presence in my life would always exist in memory, but it would no longer dictate my choices, my emotions, or my worth. I stopped at a small bench near a frozen fountain. The winter sun reflected off the ice, casting jagged patterns of light across the pavement. I sat, pulling my coat tighter, and allowed myself a moment of introspection. I had expected relief after the courtroom, but what I felt was more profound. A mix of sorrow, gratitude, and a deep, almost sacred sense of closure. I thought about all the moments I had doubted myself. The nights wondering if my anger was too much, if my refusal to support him was cruel. But as I watched the sunlight glint off the ice, I understood that the measure of compassion isn't always about saying yes. Sometimes it's about saying no when it protects the truth and safeguards the innocent. My phone buzzed, a notification from a friend checking in. I smiled faintly, typing back a short reply. I didn't feel like explaining everything yet. Some moments I realized needed to be held quietly, treasured for the strength they offered rather than the drama they contained. I thought about how this ending didn't feel like a finale in a storybook sense. There was no sweeping victory, no sudden reconciliation. Instead, it was quiet, measured, and deeply personal. Freedom, I realized, wasn't a moment. It was a series of choices, of refusing to be complicit in lies, of standing firmly in your own truth. A car drove past, its headlights illuminating the frozen street. I noticed a small child in the back seat, eyes wide and curious, pressing against the window. I felt a flicker of hope, a recognition that children, wherever they are, can be protected if adults choose honesty and courage over convenience and deception. And I knew in that moment that my choice today had mattered far beyond my own life. I stood again, brushing snow from my coat, and started walking toward home. Each step felt lighter, each breath freer. The past had returned in the courtroom, but I had faced it, spoken it, and laid it down. I wasn't tied to it anymore. The story of abandonment, lies, and broken promises would remain part of me, yes, but it would not define me. As I approached my apartment, the door felt warm beneath my fingertips. Inside, the familiar scent of home greeted me. Clean laundry, brewed coffee from the morning. A quiet stillness that felt safe and grounding. I sank into my favorite chair, letting myself finally exhale fully. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of expectation pressing on me. I didn't feel guilt for surviving, anger for enduring, or uncertainty about standing up for truth. I felt steady. I felt grounded. I felt free. I picked up my phone and typed a short note to my mother. It's done. I feel lighter than I ever thought possible. Her reply came almost instantly. I'm proud of you. You chose yourself, Tessa. That's everything. And it was true. Choosing myself, standing in my own truth, refusing to be complicit in lies. It had freed me in ways nothing else could. I realized that freedom isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a simple acknowledgement of your own strength. I spent the evening reflecting on all the small moments that had led me here. The diner, the nervous confessions, the confrontation in the courtroom. Each one had been a step toward reclaiming my life, and each had been necessary. I didn't need a perfect ending or an apology I would never receive. I had truth, and with truth came peace. By the time night fell, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Complete, unshakable calm. The past had returned. I had faced it, and now it could no longer control me. I looked out the window at the quiet street, snow glistening under the streetlights, and smiled softly. This ending was mine. It wasn't dramatic or glamorous. It was real. It was messy. It was human. And it had freed me.